You know when people try to defend rape jokes or other offensive material with the justification that humour is subjective? They're not wrong. I'm sure if you have enough of a loathsome, sick, twisted mind, it is entirely possible to find rape funny. Okay, so after that intro, I'm sure there'll be some idiot preaching about context and satire, so let's be clear. When I say rape jokes are not funny, I'm literally referring to quote-unquote humour where the punchline is ha ha rape. You'll most often see these sort of jokes crop up in the kind of offensive for the sake of being offensive culture on the internet we already discussed previously, which again misses the fact that there is usually a very good reason why it is offensive, and harmful as we'll see shortly, and doesn't stop to consider that those oversensitive retards who react and get all triggered may just have a point. You know, I find it curious how the phrase get triggered is used in a derogatory context here, given that rape is a completely legitimate trigger for some individuals. During the making of this video, one such person actually came to me to tell their story, but wished to remain anonymous. Here is their statement. I was a rape victim at a very young age of my life, different occasions and instances. I am very against rape jokes, but not because of the fact I was raped, but because of what proceeded after. The second time I was sexually assaulted, I was an adolescent, and it was by an older teenager in the neighbourhood. When we called the police, his uncle was the officer, so he had a conflict of interest and threw the case away, telling me right away in my young mind that what I went through didn't matter. His friends also caught wind of what he did to me, and rather than being civilised, normal, humane people with a shred of decency or sympathy, these boys decided to make jokes about my trauma when I walked by them at school. They would ask me how it felt, hump the things around me at after-school programs when adults weren't looking, and ask if they could get a piece of me, and make comments about my body. Mind you, I was only between the ages of 10 to 13, so I was very young compared to these other kids who were 15 to 16. I never knew quite what had been done to me, even the first time when social workers and police got involved. No one fully explained to me I had been raped until years later, when it happened again. I was only asked to use dolls, toys, and even pointing to myself to show where I had been touched and how. I was confused and scared. My mother knew something was wrong because she saw me touching myself, which shouldn't be normal for a child my age. I was 7 the first time. So she made sure to walk into the room when me and the assaulter were spending time alone together and made sure to catch him in the act. I won't go into specific details of who this person was, but I can assure you it was dealt with legally. I grew up for years, even to this day, hating my body and barely ever able to look at it or feel comfortable wearing clothes that show my arms or legs, because it was touched and violated so many times, and when you have an abusive father who shames your body after you're sexually assaulted as a child, it kinda messes with your brain. It also doesn't help when I was a child I'd go onto the main street with my mother and there was an instance a much older man was checking me out and I was 14, and almost every time I leave my house not in a sweatpants and hoodie I just get catcalled and such, reminding me of what the boys did after my rape. When I hear rape jokes, I don't hear a joke. I hear the boys constantly asking me how it felt, asking to get a piece of my ass, as they had put it, and only hearing people laugh at something, thinking what I went through was funny. My childhood being taken from me, my pain being laughed at by so many people, and feeling ashamed of being upset about what happened to me, which should never happen to a victim. I say victim because I have not worked through or gotten over the effects of my sexual assault, so a survivor is not something I feel proud to be categorized as. I'm always ashamed of myself for still being affected by my assault so deeply. I hope that my experience sheds a little light onto how victims may feel. I would go into more detail, but the full extent of my damage I went through as a child is something I'm still figuring out for myself with my therapist and close loved ones. Have a wonderful day and please take this into consideration. Remember, my story is only one of hundreds of thousands of survivors. So with all of this considered, surely the solution is to write it into law. Ban anything that can inflict trauma or actively harm people from public platforms or locations. That would be the nice, easy solution, but reality unfortunately unfortunately is not that simple. See, making it illegal to assault someone physically is one thing, but when you start bringing in what can and cannot be said, it sets a worrying precedent. It's all very well when you are the one dictating, but what about when a different ideology comes into power and starts enforcing their toxic value system? There's a reason why freedom of speech matters. Besides, ideology never really goes away. Sure, you can ban offensive material from a public forum like, say, Twitter, but those people will find somewhere else to go, underground, with no one to counter them. The mysterious Mr. Enter has already spoken at length about the dangers of this. It may not be the easy solution, but realistically all we can do is try to educate wherever possible, and make sure that those too bigoted or ignorant to listen are metaphorically dragged over hot coals, in broad daylight, for everyone to see. One of the critiques a few people made back when I did my transphobia video, including Patchwork Heart once they finally got off their high horse and came to speak to me directly, like grown adults, was that I wasn't actively trying to convince those transphobes to change their ways, that I was just preaching to the converted. And the more I think about it, that argument really misses the point. My video is inspired because I saw lots of people who aren't proactively transphobic, as in they don't necessarily believe trans people don't exist, however they still misgender constantly because it is an accepted norm to do that. My intention was never to convert those ignorant transphobes, but rather to drag that whole ideology over hot coals as an example to any reasonable people who might care to listen. After all, it is not far-right extremists or transphobes or neo-Nazis who affect mainstream values, or election results for that matter, but reasonable, sensible, ordinary individuals. And it's when this group of society start to believe that making rape jokes, misgendering people, discriminating based on ethnicity or any other such harmful behaviour is acceptable that it becomes a concern. The only way to prevent that is to educate, and you can't educate without first interrogating these behaviours out in the open and publicly shaming the shitheads who encourage them. But what about all the trauma suffered and inflicted because of it? Well, sadly that is something which is hard to combat, but that is the reason why having safe spaces is so important. And while I cannot get behind Twitter throwing people off the platform, the block button is a handy feature, and I would encourage anyone on any social media platform to use it if they ever feel their health or mental well-being is being threatened. Oh, and to those who say if you can't handle a joke you need to grow a thicker skin to actual rape and trauma victims, get fucked. Seriously, get fucked.